Slow Deep with Uni was previously the Sensory Playspace podcast. Enjoy conversations from these archives in our first year of podcasting. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Sensory Playspace podcast. I'm your host, Uni, and today I have my good friend, Christine, here with me. Christine is a good friend and a fellow teacher and mentor. And I met Christine a few years back whenever I was first entering into my birth work journey as a doula. So welcome to the space, Christine. How are you doing today? What's been good with you lately?
Thank you so much, Uni. I'm so happy to be here. We're just journeying. I feel like every season, every new stage is just like an unfolding flower in a lot of ways that tends to look different, but I'm feeling really good about it. It's really nice to be in your space. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like in like so many parts, like you've been such a big part of this journey for me. Not only in like the evolution of my knowledge and wisdom and the way that I understand like living in life, but also just in the like evolution of myself through the things that you've shared with me over the years. So I don't know, like I welcome you here with so much gratitude and excitement to just kind of expand your presence and the things that you do in the world. So maybe you can just start us off by telling the peoples a little bit about you and what you do. Let us have a little peek into the heart and space of Christine.
Oh, thank you. Um, at the heart, I am a spiritual seeker, but I'm most proud of how I've grown into myself through mothering my 4 boys. And I came into studying Ayurveda, and particularly Ayurveda for postpartum, through that journey of becoming a parent. And through studying and just being so inspired and heartfelt and really noticing the need for that type of care in the world, that really brought me to how I met you, which was through the Center for Sacred Window Studies. And that's the space where I think people are just drawn not only to figure out how to care for new families after birth, but there's an energetic there. And that's how I feel like you and I really connected, because you were drawn to the energetics that, our community was putting out there. And I really have so much trust and faith that, people who are called to this path, people who are called to come into this program and into our lives in that way, are people were meant to meet, and people were meant to broaden this sort of collective effort, this collective understanding of how do we care for ourselves in a more conscious way? How do we care for, these new families who are clearly underserved in the medical community? And I think there's a lot of connection between the health of our society and the health of those transitionary times, and the postpartum window being one that I'm particularly called to serve in. So I just really love how the people that I meet through the center have really helped and taught me so much about the work in general, about new perspectives, about being a better teacher, about understanding myself better. And I think it's been several years since we've been working together in various ways. And I really treasure that. I really do. So yeah, that's what I have to say about me at this point.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I feel like I was just as you were kind of going through your introduction, I just had a memory pop up where how I actually found you was through a podcast. I whenever I started off birth work, which you know, but I'll share with the space through my creative outlet as a photographer. And so I had my first birth at a birthing center. My client had hired me to document their birth. And in that room, in the space, I was like, holy shit, like if I'm going to be here, I really need to know more to take up space. Like every person in this room is an asset. And right now, I don't feel like an asset. I feel like I'm just like in the way. And so I started like really talking to friends and like just like brainstorming and kind of like fishing around. And a good friend of mine, my friend Brittany, had sent me a podcast and she was like, this is for you. And it was an interview you did. I don't remember the podcast, but you were talking about the Center for Sacred Window Studies and about postpartum. And that was a lot of what I was talking about in my like explorations of like, where am I going? What am I like? What do I feel called to? Because I feel really called to what I've come to label as transitional work. And that really started with postpartum. I've experienced it in like my own personal medicine journeys and witnessing other people in theirs, and then exploring and like actually journeying with people through their postpartum journeys has led me into more of like what I'm doing currently, which is somatic work and sexual healing work and relationship work and connectivity work. And so it's been really beautiful to like learn from you, to discover you in that way, to like step into that space, go through my own journey, watch you go through journeys, and then like move into this new place and still have like what feels like for me like a deep connection, even though we only get to connect every few months.
Yeah, yeah, totally agreed. And I love the synchronicities of all of that. And I think it's so beautiful to see how, the areas that we're drawn to expand on and study, regardless if we decide to go into professional practice specifically with those skills that we're learning, they all layer on top of one another to create a really beautiful, unique fabric of perspective and gifts with which to offer how our communities in whatever way we're working in them. So I love it, and I love the way that you've created your work in such an intentional way based on a lot of what we learn in our program, but also all the other layers of personal study and work that you've done. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to talk a little bit about, I feel like something that I have seen come up in like the birth space and like in the reproductive care space, no matter where it's at. But I don't feel like I have personally experienced or witnessed a lot of like depth in these conversations. And so that was kind of what I wanted to chat with you about today, was just like sex and pregnancy and postpartum and how the body changes, and how our desires change and what, like, how do we evolve with that? And so, yeah, I think like something that I witnessed a lot whenever I was actively working and supporting people as a doula, is just the like intricacies of the way our like body and our hormones and our feelings and emotions like evolve, like not even over time, but sometimes like moment to moment, especially like during pregnancy, but continued through postpartum. So I know that you've been working in this space for so long. You also have 4 children of your own. So you also have like your own inner knowing and inner experience. I'd love to hear like anything that you have to share with us about that.
It's such a good topic. And I guess I just want to begin with saying that I see this as a deeply personal and individual and unique experience for each person. So there's so many factors that contribute to how our journey looks in creating a strong sense of our own sexuality and our relationships with our partners and intimacy. And that is so impacted by our prior understanding of how we identified as a sexual person, how our bodies were impacted by pregnancy and postpartum, by the ways that our relationships are set up already, and how that manifests with our personal relationships with our partners. So there's so many different ways that we can begin to do the inner work based on what our intention is. How do we want to feel as a sexual person? How do we want to feel as a person at home in our bodies as we're going through these really intense changes? And I remember reading so much when I was pregnant with my first child, and I was reading all these like kind of more like alternative storytelling type accounts, and different authors and storytellers were talking about the amazing opportunity for just incredible sex while pregnant, and incredible sensation and enhanced, even during postpartum, like the opportunity for, you're nursing your baby and then you're all like primed and ready to go. And I remember feeling so let down because that was not what was happening for me at all. And I really wanted that to be a thing for me, but it wasn't. And so
Mm.
I kind of was trying not to get too upset about it. And I was trying to just be really present with my own experience. And throughout this conversation, I'm really going to be sharing about my own personal understanding and experience, because as I said at the beginning, it's truly an individual journey. But that's kind of the best part about it, is it's like it's it's up to us how we want to experience our own power, our own sensuality. And there's so many things that contribute to that. And what I've been thinking a lot about in preparation for this conversation, at some point we can get into it, is really that overarching aspect of when we are well, when we are in a place of healthy balance, when we are in a place of feeling safe and cared for, a natural reflection of that is how vital we feel and how we're ready to go to a place of really harnessing that beautiful nature's power within us, that's reflected in our sexuality and our access to be intimate in the ways that make us feel really good. So much of that is really based on what we're doing here, which is creating conscious care during those transition moments in life, particularly in my case, the pregnancy and postpartum journey. So when I have everything set up and I know that I am in a good place on all those levels, physically, emotionally, spiritually, emotionally, I'm ready to go. I'm super ready, and I'm able to access the expansion that I want to access. Whereas if I'm super depleted, which is the case for so many people, that's going to be a lot harder. And I'm probably not going to be prioritizing any of that in the way that I could be. So I'll start with that. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, there's so much there. And I think like I I don't know if this is going to be something I experience in this lifetime, right? Like I teeter back and forth if I want to be a parent, if I don't. I lean more towards not, it's not a necessity for like my identity or my journey. I also feel like I parent all the time. And so there's parts of me that's like, okay, like being a parent is 24/7 until the day you die. I had that realization at some point with my dad where, I'm about to be 40 in September, which is wild to me in so many ways. But looking at that and being like, okay, at every moment, like when you choose to be a parent, regardless of how that choice comes into formation, whether it was like an active choice or a more passive choice, a surrender, um, you're choosing that to like expand into that part of your identity. And it's been really interesting, like being able to be invited to be close to people that are like navigating the transition of their identity into letting go and shedding all of who they were, and then starting to become like another layer of self, which is what we all do, right? But the uniqueness of being a parent and like that part of the journey is that a big part of your identity is of service to someone else or someone else's, depending on what your parenting looks like. Um, and I feel like there's so much like parallel between this like birth, pregnancy, like this reproductive window, and our sexual window. And so I can't speak about like birthing or being pregnant. I've never been pregnant. I've never had a baby or like moved through birth. And so I feel like a lot of my like thoughts are theories and observations through conversation. But I feel like through my like evolution of my like sexuality and my exploration, it has there's been like parallels through this like evolution of self, like as people are going through their reproductive journey. And you just brought up, like the capacity piece. Whenever you have capacity, it looks differently than whenever you're depleted. And I feel like that is so much of the same of like us in our like sexual body, right? Like whenever I am really present, my experiencing through like my body in any kind of way, but especially like in my sexual body, is so much different than whenever I'm disassociated or depleted or exhausted or fawning or conforming to something else outside of me. So I don't know. That was kind of what came up for me.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think in my experience, that access of being present was something that was really hard to do in those early stages. I mean, I think pregnancy for me was much more of a time that I could access that, though I just felt a little bewildered by my gigantic belly and how to navigate that in those moments. And also just the openness, and this was something that I really thought about in my own experience as well, is how it became an opportunity to try new things, which felt really great. It felt like a necessity. It wasn't even like a suggestion. It was like, okay, well, if we're going to make this work, we need to do it a little different. And I really loved that. I think that in itself created an opportunity for um, just some joyfulness and fun and creativity in the way we wanted to connect. Um, and also, it wasn't something that my body was like, I think we again like have to look at the individual person, and like I was craving some other ways of connecting and feeling loved and intimate, and not necessarily the ways that I wanted to do that before I was pregnant. And so looking back on it now, I actually have a much gentler and um, I really honor all those ways that I felt that in the moment I kind of felt a little unsettled that my desires were changing and that my the things that I'd wanted before or that felt great before were no longer feeling the same way. So I appreciate now looking back in a way that I couldn't really appreciate fully in the moment. Um, but in postpartum, that was really, really hard, Uni. I felt like my first birth was a beautiful birth, but my son was really a big baby and I tore pretty significantly. And so the process of healing my perineum with him left something called granular tissue. So when the scar forms, it creates like these little extra pieces of tissue on top of that scar. And it made it very painful to have penetration. It made it very, very uncomfortable. And so finally, I had one of my midwives support me in removing that granular tissue, which in itself was really traumatic. So entering back into sex with my husband was not comfortable to begin with. And then to go through like an extra, really kind of scary procedure to have that removed. And I remember laying there like with my baby. She's like, why don't you just hold your baby on your chest? I was fully awake while this was happening. And
Oh,
I'm like holding my baby on my chest. And she's, removing that granular tissue. And I was just like weeping, like crying, crying, crying. And this is probably 6 months after he was born. So I feel like that whole first year for me, what like involved fear and a lot of depletion, because at that point I did not have any of the skill set or awareness that I have now of all of the beautiful traditions around healing and postpartum that would have created a lot more vitality in general in my whole body, in my whole mental space and emotional space, spiritual space. I was just really running on empty for that year. So I feel like when I look back on it now, I can see that because of that struggle, I gained a whole lot of perspective that I was able to apply and become more of the person having the experiences that I want to have now. But at the time, I just felt like I couldn't trust that my body was going to be able to do what I wanted it to do. And that created like an inability to truly open up in all the ways that I wanted to be open with my partner. So, not that there was any kind of, hard feelings or anything there, but it was like I needed to protect myself. And so I had to just close those doors to intimacy in that way or risk really, really hurting. And so he was super aware of a lot of it, but he was also going through his own rite of passage as, a partner, a parent, new parent, even if you're not the birth parent, is going through. I can see all this now in a different light that I couldn't at the time.
definitely. And you said so many like really like poignant things that I wanted to try to remember and like plug back into. But the fear piece, right? Like the fear and the way that we connect with our body. And you mentioned hard emotions, right? I think that, or no, you mentioned hard feelings. There was no hard feelings. Like there were hard feelings, right? The feelings that you were feeling, the sensations, like the experience that you were having was very challenging for you and for your partner, I imagine, because ultimately, like you're two people that chose this journey together. And one of the things that you chose in this journey is connection with one another. And the way that we experience connection is through our body, is through our sexuality, is through that expression. And like the yumminess and rawness and excitement and like youthfulness of relationship often like has in some parts an abundance of that, right? And as we move along in our relationship, that changes and evolves. But going through any kind of trauma and what you experience, like what people experience through pregnancy and birth, is a trauma to the body. It may be complex for some people, it may be really hard, it may be simpler and easier to navigate through, but your body is experiencing change. And that does create hard feelings, not necessarily for or towards a person, but it is something that is challenging that you have to move through and experience and overcome. And only you can do that, which is wild. It's such a lot. Like, I feel like the way that we, like, the connectivity between the emotion and the physical body, and the way that's translated through like our feelings and sensations and fears is intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really intense. And um, I think it's this beautiful opportunity to become super keyed in with this present moment. And we brought this up before, but that to me is like what it's all about. Because when there's a moment where something starts to feel hard or scary, I have learned from myself that if I pause and I really look at that thing that feels hard or scary, when I put my attention on it, it starts to dissolve some of its scariness just a little bit. And I learned something about myself when I let myself really be with something, even if it feels uncomfortable. And if I'm letting myself just really be with it, with the hard thing, I notice that I'm able to like hear or sense or see like the next right thing to do about it. And maybe that's just sit there and hold it, like recognizing that I'm scared right now to go into this position, or I'm scared right now to, have this familiar thing because it's not the same as it was, um, or even I'm scared to say this thing because I'm not used to communicating with my partner or myself in this way. And what happens if I just say it anyway and get really honest and clear? And then all of a sudden, it's almost always better and more authentically received than I was afraid it might have been. So that is like a wicked growth moment right there when I'm able to do something and just be with something that was feeling intimidating. So the whole process of unfolding my sexuality after becoming a mom and becoming a parent, and the way that I've been able to apply that into how I honor other postpartum people is just that it's the most beautiful unfolding journey of understanding ourselves and loving ourselves, which enables us to love and understand the person we want to be with.
So I feel like, I mean, you mentioned communication, right? Which I think is one of the like hardest things that most people like are in continual work with, is how to communicate differently, how to communicate better, how to be more compassionate in communication. Can you give us an example or maybe some like ideas of how to like communicate about this experience with your partner? I think we hear a lot about the journey of the birthing person and how the body is changing and the hormones are changing and how we're feeling and the fears and the insecurities. But like, I haven't heard, and maybe I'm just not listening in the right places, but I haven't heard a lot about how do we bring that connection back into something that feels good, even though it's going to be new and it's going to be different. Um, can you think of anything to like share with us on how you kind of like navigated that with your partner, or tips for people who maybe don't know how to?
Yeah, to me, the communication piece is paramount. And I say this while also saying that I'm still working on it. It's not something that was ever uh, shown to me as an example, or, um, you know, sexuality and partnership was not something that, I was ever taught from my parents or any skilled mentor that could help me develop those skills. So I feel like I fumbled along. But I do really trust my higher knowing, and I trust my connection with the universe and knowing what is aligned and what is right. And even though I may not always do it well, I believe that creating loving communication about what we need with our partners is a skill that always yields closer relationships and relationships with greater respect. So my experience has been hit or miss. Like when I hold my feelings back because I'm feeling, a little resentful, or maybe feeling like, he should already know this. Like, why do I have to say it? Like all those kind of extra residue layers of baggage that I'm carrying around get in the way of my communication. I have found that just prioritizing time with him to like look in the eyes and say what it is that I want, but also there's so many more ways to communicate than words. So sometimes words are not what's best for us. And so we can say a million things without saying words.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, that has been like this beautiful, almost practice of like being able to communicate heart to heart with our movements, with our eyes, with our breath, with our bodies, to create a really meaningful connection and understanding of each other's needs without actually saying any words. And that, in a lot of ways, has been gentler and less scary and deeper in a lot of ways than like sitting down and having a talk. However, that talking piece of it for so many people, myself included, is tricky sometimes, but really important too. So, again, like for me, if I'm feeling like I'm scared to say this thing, then I know, like, oh, I think you need to say that thing.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's we're communicating all the time, but first it's communicating with ourselves. What do I want?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need right now? What am I curious about? Um, so once I'm clear about what it is that I'm wanting and needing, then I can create communication with my partner to find out what he's wanting, needing, and curious about.
Yeah. I love that you brought that you like kind of brought into that the like nonverbal communication, right? Like how are we attuning to one another? How are we like essentially like morphing? Like how are we really coming together and getting a perspective of what the other person is like thinking, feeling? And I think that that is, for me personally, that is like one of the most beautiful and exciting things about connecting with someone else is it's not this like replication. It's not like this like manual. They're like, here's what to do or here's what I'm feeling. It's like really dropping into presence and like figuring out what is happening with them and then mirroring that back to them in a way that can allow them to feel safe to be more vulnerable, which I think is like what the tricky part is with like the verbal communication because we have the feelings and if someone is really paying attention to us, if we're really paying attention to one another, we can like drop into and like understand the vulnerability that someone is not communicating with the person, right? We can see when someone is feeling guarded or when someone feels stressed or when someone is sad or when someone is excited or when someone's like really elated. Like the more time you spend with someone, you can tune into that more. But the vulnerability, I think for me, like the safety and vulnerability for me personally has come when someone is actually present with me and giving me that space for my body to calm, for my nervous system to shift, for me to think about the thing that feels weird or scary or nervous or like edgy, and then giving me space and encouraging me in that space to like really bring it to surface, whether it be through like my actions or through my words. But I think that for me, like also the like being able to communicate things with my words has given me a lot more power in the ways that my actions follow. And so it's this like dance, I think, and that is relating with people, which ultimately is what we're doing with sex, right? Like in our sexual body and our sexuality and the acts of sex, we are exploring relating over and over again. And I don't know, it's fun, it's creative, it can be weird, it can be scary, it can be like healing, it can be traumatic. But I think that that is part of the journey that we get to choose.
Absolutely. And it's really a beautiful journey. And I think in postpartum, what I was really given permission to do multiple times by um, my midwives and other care providers, and also my partner, was that I'm in charge of how and where this goes, because he can't tell like where the places are that are super tender, or that are like the structure is different than it was before. Or, you know, in postpartum, you're like, I just remember how sore my body was and how sore my boobs were from constantly nursing, and I needed to be assured that I could create the circumstances and the pace and the whatever we wanted to do, like I got to choose. And that felt really safe for me. Um, at least safer than otherwise. And everyone is different, every body is different, but I feel like that first year was really testing the waters and being able to re-establish myself as a sexual person. And I was so happy to become a mom. And so I feel like I had a lot of I really honor my incredible body for all the things that it's doing. And I wasn't super psyched about how I looked and how different parts of my body felt. I held both. I held both of those realities. Like I am like a divine being for having just done this. And I wish I looked a little hotter right now. And so, having four in 10 years, there was a lot of in and out of sizes, and marks that are there now that weren't there before, like areas of my, skin that's not going to be as tight and beautiful as it was when I was in my early 20s. There's just ways that I bear the after effects of birthing. And we can have a lot of healthy thoughts and ideas about how strong and beautiful we are. But I have found it's still a practice in getting to know and getting to appreciate the changes and the wounds, but also like, it's like the most beautiful battle that we can ever go through. And we carry those wounds and those scars. So I love that, but it has been a process. And I think now, where my youngest is 7, I feel like in the last, few years, I'm still unfolding and entering into this new phase of who I am as a sexual person and how I feel in my body, which is different than it was, when I was still nursing and all of those things. So it's just this beautiful, elongated exploration. It doesn't end. I'm finding it doesn't end.
No, it never ends because we're constantly evolving, like we are creatures, we are products of nature. And we have talked about this a lot, like the cycles and the seasons. and how that happens like on a yearly basis, but it also happens like on a life basis. And so you're constantly evolving and cycling. And I don't know, I was just wondering, I feel like in the birth space, we also talk a lot about like our own journeys, which is, I think, one of the most important things that we like get to discover and uncover. But looking at like our sexuality and our sex and our activity whenever we have partners and people that we have been on or like going through parts of this journey with, what are some like, can you remember or think of any things that kind of you were able to do to assure your partner? Because you mentioned it like briefly earlier, you know, like he was in his own journey, he was in his own insecurities or fears or emotions, grief, like anger, like all like joys, like all the things that you were also experiencing, but you guys are doing it in separate ways. Um, so I'm curious, as you were like kind of navigating like your body things and the feelings and not being able to meet him maybe in some of his desires, what were some things that you were able to do to help reassure him? Because it sounds like you shared there were things that he was able to do to kind of meet you where you were at. Were there some things that you were able to do that also helped him feel closer to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I think it feels a little hard to pinpoint one thing
Yeah.
because I would love to ask him his reflections on how that time was. I think a lot of times partners in the birthing spaces and new family spaces have a really unique role that is also really not given the attention to that it should. And their needs are often overlooked for the birthing parents' needs. And I understand this, and in a balanced, healthy relationship, both people's needs are being prioritized.
Yeah.
So I think, in a way, looking back, if I were to say, I think, we each have our own kind of love languages, and I think his is really in being seen and being heard,
Mm.
being held, but not always in a physical sense, but just like his
Showing
space.
up.
Yeah. And so when I was able to do that, that's what created a feeling for him of openness and intimacy. But so much of that in hindsight, based on which postpartum window it was, because particularly the first one was kind of a shit show in a lot of ways. And so I look back at that and we were both like pretty young and figuring it out and not always doing it well because we didn't have the capacity or the understanding to do it well. But at the underlying level, we had so much love and stability there to begin with that carried us through until we could get back on stable footing for me to be able to really hold his needs in the way that I think he needed it.
Yeah. And I ask that because it's like there's so much anxiety that I've seen like in the postpartum space, right? Anxiety of like you brought up some of the things like about your physical body. There's like the tiredness and the exhaustion. There's this like I need to show up for my partner in this specific way or else it's going to result in something negative, right? Um, and there's that like capacity of like holding yourself, holding this new life that you've co-created, then holding this other person that you have like a whole like relationship and past with. And sometimes like the balancing of meeting someone else's needs and like the contrast of our own needs like don't really line up. And I think that it's such an interesting like formula of like how do we collaboratively like meet needs, and then how do we also like hold our own space, because I think that translates into the physical active sex, right, where sometimes it's talked about like, okay, like get your own needs met, or you know, like I'm here to like serve someone else like in sex. But realistically, it's, for me, like the way that I see it is a collaborative process that we are giving and receiving it in separate times, and maybe there's moments that it's coming together like in this fluidity in the exact same moment, but realistically it's an ebb and flow throughout the process, however long like that scene or session or journey or whatever word you put into into that space is. And I think that that is kind of like what I feel happens like in that postpartum space too.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately a lot of relationships dissolve after their children come along because there's been a severing of what was established and an inability to recreate something that's just as meaningful or provides acknowledgement and access to people's needs, meeting people's needs. So I think that there's so much opportunity. We call it the sacred window because it's a really unique period of time. The energetics are very different for healing and being open and bonding. It's not just bonding with your baby, it's also an opportunity to bond with your partner in a new way, which unfolds all kinds of opportunities for intimacy and creativity and satisfaction and giving. So, there's intention, but then there's also being in a place where we can expand into really bringing that opportunity into our lives and giving it a chance. So, yeah, it's very beautiful to me, and it's also um, something that isn't talked about enough. So I'm really glad that you are opening the conversation on this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for exploring it with me, and with us, I'll say.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
I definitely want to sit with that longer, and I may come back to that. So if you have a
Yeah,
chat with
there's
your
a lot
husband,
there.
and if there's anything that you both feel open to sharing, like I'd love to hear more. And I'm sure that the people listening and tuning in might be curious about it as well.
Mm,
I don't want to keep you too much longer. I want to be respectful and honoring of time, but I want to I like to kind of wrap up and close up the space and show with just a bucket list question. And I would love to hear if you feel open to sharing consent, like you have your space to consent to whatever feels good for you. But now that you are like, you have gone through multiple like immediate postpartum windows, and then you're still in a postpartum space, but I think you said your last baby is 7 now. So you're like in a whole new chapter and layer. What is something that you maybe haven't experienced in your sexual space that you're curious or like interested in exploring at
mm.
this point in your life?
Well, I feel really good and grounded and balanced in my body and my heart, my spirit in a way that has been a journey to get to over all of these years having babies. And what I am curious about exploring is elevating the spiritual experience of sex and intimacy and creating expansion in my heart and spirit in that way with my husband. And to me, there's so much to be discovered in self and in relationship. And so that's what I'm curious about, and that's what I'm open to trying in more and more ways. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I love that. And offline, if you find any practices or anything like that, feel free to share. Because I feel like that's where I'm at in my journey as well, is like really in this like deeper place of self and looking at what that looks like through my spiritual body. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you for this conversation and your time and space today. Um, is there anything coming up that we can get excited about with you, or any ways that feel good for you to stay connected? I'll also drop in like your website link and all of that in the show notes. But anything that you want to just shout out before we wrap up today?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been amazing, Uni. I guess our programming is so, pretty solid and cyclical at this point. The conscious postpartum caregiver program is every year it just grows more fully into itself, and we have more and more students coming into it. It's a year-long sacred cycle. You're learning conscious postpartum care from the Ayurvedic perspective, but it's such an embodied program that you're taking yourself on this personal journey of conscious caregiving at the same time. And we also offer a hands-on opportunity for people that are really called and able to be in person. So that happens once a year. But ultimately, it's really my commitment to creating access for people to move down this path. I think it is supporting humanity at large as more and more of us become trained in this type of work. So I love to talk to people, and Uni can attest. I'm always happy to have conversations with people considering this path. But beyond that, there's just a lot of great resources and perspectives, um, and the website, will direct you to all of that. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Yeah, thank you. And I will definitely like just amp that up. Like I think that the conscious postpartum caretaker program really transformed my life. Ayurveda specifically, and even though I'm not certain that that will be part of my journey, it has helped me really understand people um, from all walks of life in such a like beautiful, tender way that has helped me soften. And if you ever have the opportunity to share space with Christine, I highly, highly recommend it. Christine, you're such a beautiful mirror and gift to the world. So thank you for being here with us. And thank you for sharing your heart and your space. And thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you soon.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Slow Deep with Uni, formerly known as the Sensory Playspace podcast. You can find out more about today's show and all the things that we dive deep into at slowdeep.co and slowdeep.substack.com.